أو لهوا فضوا إليها وتركوك قائما. Quran. It is not something that we have fabricated in the history. Quran tells us that there came a time when the Prophet was delivering a sermon of Jummah. And there came a caravan of trade, okay, trade is something that people could go to, because money rules, Unfortunately, money is something that overpowers us at times. And to trade, to make money, to earn money, we are inclined to put aside a lot of things just to make money, So we can't blame them, وَإِذَا رَأَوْا تِجَارَةً. Okay. أَوْ لَهْوًا. Not only tijara. If it was just the trade, the business, we could say, there would be people who would say, I can't close my business on such and such date because, I will lose money. Okay. Understandable. Money is something that overpowers us. Okay. But that was not only money. They were running for playful things too. Not only money. We have said that if people run away from the battlefield, it's understandable because, in the battlefield, your own life is at stake, and maybe sometimes you will turn back to protect your own self. Understandable. No criticism there. Tijara, maybe, business, money. Okay, no criticism. But how about this? What kind of Islam or Iman is that? Where you leave the Prophet for lahu. وَإِذَا رَأَوْا تِجَارَةً أَوْ لَهْوًا انْفَضُّوا إِلَيْهَا وَتَرَكُوكَ قَائِمًا, and leave you standing. The Prophet is giving the sermon, and he is standing, and they leave him. And this is not the first year of Hijrah, this is not the second year of Hijrah, this is not the third. Yes, understand this, that probably at that time, maybe there were thousands of Muslims, in Medina at least. When you have a chance here to say your Jummah prayers, and those of you who can make it, try to make it, don't you? Suppose a marja was here leading the prayers. A mujtahid was here leading the prayers. Much more people would come just because, someone is here who is leading the prayers, is much qualified, is a great marja. Okay. Suppose the imam was leading the prayers. More people would be there. Now imagine for a moment that the Prophet ﷺ himself is leading the prayers. He is the one who is giving khutbah. Brothers, you have not read Quran. Read Quran and open your eyes to what was happening. We talk about so many issues, in Karbala. Why Karbala happened? And this is going to be my, topic for the next 3 days, Why Karbala happened? Karbala happened because there was a mentality that was not accepting the reality of Islam, the truth of Islam, the essence of Islam, the message of Islam. And it had outwardly clocked itself in Islam. Remember, Hussein's action was not merely a reaction to Yazid's demand of bay'ah. Okay. As a matter of fact, Masoom's actions are not reactionary in nature. Okay. You have to understand. Okay. They are not reactionary in nature. Okay. We'll come to that inshallah. But remember this, that the Prophet is leading the prayers. He is giving the khutbah, and people leave. And this is not the first year of Hijrah. And we are not picking this up from any book of history or tradition that you would say that this has been fabricated. This Quran, those of you who know Arabic know it, this is the exact translation. That they leave you standing. What was the problem? The problem was they were not aware of the greatness of the Prophet himself. And unless and until you are aware of the greatness of the Prophet, you cannot be aware of the truth of Islam and the sublimity of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. You cannot understand Tawheed without going through the Nabuwah of the Prophet. If Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is mercy, the Prophet is the gateway to that mercy. If Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is the sustainer and the provider, the provision and sustenance comes through the gate. The gate is Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. They failed to understand that. They were not aware of it. Time passed. But the Prophet, in spite of these roadblocks, in spite of this non-cooperation, was able to do a few things which no one else before him was able to. And that too, in a short span of 10 years. Such a change never occurred before in the annals of humanity. The first change. The Prophet, for the first time, truly established a system of governance where the dictates of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala were supreme. The law of the land was the law given by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, which meant that the prophecy and prophethood was no more a marginal in the society. It was the center of society. The prophets before him, for example, Musa, Isa, Ibrahim, they truly gave the law of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to the people, but they were never implemented. The book was there, the practice was not there. The laws were there, they were not implemented. The existence of a lot of prophets was marginal as far as the society was concerned, not central and pivotal as was the case in Medina. That was the first thing that he achieved. The second, a social structure where equity, equality, and justice became the norm and not the exception. In the past, at times, justice was an exception. Sometimes justice was dispensed by rulers or tribal chiefs. Here, it became the norm and no exceptions to it. It's so difficult to turn a society that is tuned to injustice, oppression, and suppression, turn it upside down and make that society such that justice rules, equity is the rule, and that people are being trained into their ideology. But justice and equality cannot be imposed as such. There must be people who are willing to accept the truth of justice, the truth of equality, the reality of equity, that men are equal, that the best one is the one who is the most submissive to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. This was the code of Islam. The Prophet is seated. Some of his companions are rich, some are poor. And in the seating arrangement in the Prophet's mosque, there is no distinction. Anyone can sit anywhere. Whoever comes first sits. The places are not reserved as such. A rich companion of the Prophet is seated, and comes a poor man, another companion of the Prophet. And he sits next to the rich man. The rich man moves his dress away slightly. In one of the rare moments of history, the Prophet's anger is visible. Seldom can you find any incident in the history when the Prophet's displeasure was so vividly shown as was this incident? Why did he do that? The Prophet never names names. That is the greatness of the Prophet. Okay. He talks about qualities, attributes. You decide who is the person who fits those attributes. I don't have to name names. The Prophet looks at the person, the rich man. Why did you do that? The person understands that he has made a mistake. He bows down his head for a moment and then raises up his head and says, "Oh Prophet, I'm sorry. I made a mistake." Remember, no words have been uttered. No insults have been levied upon. An action that was completely normal otherwise. You move your dress, but you have moved it because a poor fellow came next to you. This was unacceptable to the Prophet. If you really look for sins, probably you cannot find it otherwise. But then the Prophet was looking for a society that would be much higher than the ritual concept of sins that we have. There is something much more intellectual, much more ideological. "Oh Prophet, I have made a mistake. And if this brother of mine forgives me, I am willing to give half of my possessions and wealth to him." If he forgives me, I am willing to give half of my possessions to him. The Prophet looks at the poor companion. What do you say? And one of the best remarks that you could find, the poor companion says, "Oh Prophet, I forgive him. But I don't want a single penny of the wealth that made him arrogant in the first place." This is what the Prophet is attaining. Seldom have we discussed these things. A society where equity, justice, and where man's greatness is not dependent on what he owns in terms of worldly possessions, where the greatness is how much submissive he is to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, where piety rules, where taqwa is the core of conduct. The Prophet then instituted the system of equity and justice. At the same time, when we talk about justice, and if the society around us is full of injustice, we can't achieve much. Which brings me to the distribution of wealth at the time of the Prophet. In those days, there were not many jobs as we have today, no industries. A lot of the followers of the Prophet were dependent upon the welfare state. And that welfare state dispensed money through Baitul Mal, where the taxes, where zakat, where things were put into Baitul Mal, and from Baitul Mal were dispensed. Or booty and loot from the battles that they had and whatnot. There was distribution of wealth. That distribution of wealth was equal. And after the Prophet, it changed so dramatically that when Ali ibn Abi Talib became the caliph, and he distributed the money from Baitul Mal for the first time, and I'll go back over it again, inshallah. He gave everyone 3 dirham. A Quraysh woman came to Ali ibn Abi Talib and said, you equated me with that non-Quraysh black slave. You gave her the same as you gave me. Imam Ali picked up a handful of dust and said, this is your origin and her origin. You are from dust and she is from dust. What makes you superior to her? In the tribal system of Arabia, the superiority was ingrained in the culture. This tribe was great. And these die-hard notions were again resurgent after the Prophet. But again, going back to what the Prophet was doing. The Prophet, at the same time, after instituting the equal distribution of wealth, also made sure that those who followed him were not only treated equally in his presence, but equally throughout the Muslim world. At times when I'm sitting, oh, we are all equal here. But then as we go out, the things change. No. Throughout the Muslim land, wherever his representatives were, equity, equality, and justice was assured. And all this in a period of 10 years, when he had to go himself or send some of his companions out to battle for 88 times. The Prophet had to go to battle himself or send his companions to battle 88 times. To the extent that he said that even when you are praying, your swords must be by your side, because you don't know when you will be attacked or when you have to go for jihad. Such was the pressure, intense pressure from external forces. And in spite of all that, the Prophet was able to achieve what he did. The person who wrote 100 Great Men put the Prophet's name at the top. The book is available, maybe it's in your library too. He is not a Muslim, he's a Jewish guy. He was asked, and there were a lot of people who really went after him for this. Why did you put his name at the top? The Prophet's name, 100 Great Men. He said, in subsequent interviews and publications, he said, I could not find a man in the human history who was able to change things so completely and totally in such a short span of time as he was able to, and things that are still as relevant as they were when he changed them. Changes do occur, but then changes are transitional. They change. Change itself is a transition. But the changes that the Prophet made are still the cry for justice in the modern world. Where else can you find the call for equity and equality more vocal than in the sayings of Ali ibn Abi Talib? Where can you find the stand for justice as clear as in the case of Hussein ibn Ali? Can you? Is there anyone else in the history whose name you could bring forward in contrast to these names? Never. On one hand, this was the Prophet dispensing for the humanity what he did for himself. Did he gain any worldly wealth? Even though my belief and yours is that everything in existence belonged to him. There was not an atom in existence that could be conceived of being opposed to him or his orders. Everything was subservient to him. And yet, what did he have? One of the wives of the Prophet narrates that the day he passed away, there was not enough oil in the home to light a lamp. I'm not talking about cooking the food. To light a lamp. Which brings me to the leadership itself. If you want to exercise leadership, then the path is charted out for you. It calls for much greater sacrifice. It calls for leaving away a lot of things. It calls for disregarding what a lot of people consider to be normal. A person is in Kufa. He is a stranger to Kufa. The time is the caliphate of Ali ibn Abi Talib. He is late in the evening and there is no one in the mosque except one person who is saying the prayers. The culture in those days was slightly different. You could go to a mosque and be assured that you would have a resting place if you are a stranger in the town, and someone would take care of you as far as the food was concerned. Because in reality, Islam was much more of a brotherhood. He waited for the person to finish his prayers. He approached. I'm a stranger. Come on, join with me for food. He was all too happy. Okay. He opens up his bag and out come two stale bread. So hard that they could not be broken by hands. And the person is unable to. This man who had been praying breaks it on his knee and takes that bread with water. And looking at the stranger says, this may be hard for you. Go to such and such neighborhood. There you will find the grandson of the Prophet. His name is Hassan. And there is a soup kitchen. In today's language, we'll call it soup kitchen. The food is available at all times. Go. He went to the neighborhood, found the house. He was invited in, started eating. And there were other people also eating. Now what he would do, he would eat and set something aside. Hassan, oh brother, eat. Whatever you want to take, we'll pack it up for you. We'll give it to you. Why are you putting aside? You have some children or family? We can give for them too. But no, you have not a son. I'm not taking, I'm alone. I don't have family or children. I'm taking for a man whom I saw in the mosque, and he gave me the address to your place. I saw him praying after he finished the prayer. He invited me for food. And when he opened up his bag, the bread was so hard that he couldn't break with his hands. He had to break it on his knee. I want to take some food to him. Hassan asked, do you know who he is? I don't know who he is. But he seemed to be a very pious man. You don't know who he is. He is Ali ibn Abi Talib. He is my father. He has chosen that lifestyle for himself. A leader cannot eat full when those who are being governed are hungry. And he can't have warm and delicious meals when others in his role don't have. This is the standard of leadership established by Islam. Can you give me any other person in the history? This is the fruit of the effort of Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. मुझे सिर्फ 15 मिनट अंग्रेजी में बात करनी थी और बाकी उर्दू में अगर आप इजाज़त दें तो मैं अंग्रेजी में कुछ और बात करूं. I said I was scheduled to speak only for 15 minutes in English, and I think I have crossed that much earlier. And I wanted to, just speak more in English so that others would benefit as well. Okay. So this is the standard that he has given. You want to lead, then this must be the standard. A leader, the one who governs, not only must be projecting taqwa himself, he must be surrounded by people who are pious in their disposition. The same Kufa. There's a person whose name is Malik al-Ashtar. He is the commander of Ali's army. A man known for bravery, a man who has been tested in field after field, in battle after battle, to be the most courageous man of his time. A man whose name sent shivers in the army of Syria. He is in Kufa. Probably he has come after Hajj. and he has shaved his head. As is common when people have shaved head, there are others who throw stones or hit, or make mockery, whatever. He is passing by a market. When a person comes from the back and either throws a stone at him or hits him on the head, he keeps on walking towards the mosque and goes in the mosque. An onlooker tells this guy, you know who he was? No, he's just a bald man. He is Malik, commander-in-chief of Ali's army. Now the shiver sets in. He runs. Seldom people apologize to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala that way. Seek repentance that way. He runs. That's because they see the immediate. They're not aware of what's going to happen next. Runs after him. He is already in the mosque saying the prayers. And this person is impatiently, walking back and forth. That as soon as he finishes the prayers, he would kneel down, kiss his hand, and ask for forgiveness. He finishes the prayer. I'm sorry. I hit you. I made a mistake. Malik, of course, realized that he has known him now. But then Malik is a different person. He is not a commoner, as a matter of fact. Anyone who has been illuminated by the light of Ali ibn Abi Talib becomes a different person. He doesn't remain the same person anymore. That light is so distinctly different than anything else. I forgave you. And believe me, I had said those 2 rakat prayers to ask for forgiveness from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala for you. This is the character. The leader then builds the character around him. Whether you find in the night of Ashura or elsewhere, you will see the men who are so different from the surroundings because they have opted for the divine dictates over everything else. There is one companion. There are other companions of Ali ibn Abi Talib. There is a woman whose sons have been killed in the Battle of Siffin, whose brother, whose son-in-law and his husband have also been killed in the Battle of Siffin. And she was herself present in the Battle of Siffin, chanting, encouraging the army of Ali ibn Abi Talib to fight. It happens that now is the rule of Muawiyah. And the lines cross. Her chants in the Battle of Siffin were so vocal that even Muawiyah had heard. And now there's a time for him to pay back. Sarcastically, he says, "Oh, you are such and such who are encouraging people to fight against us. Where is your brother? Where is your husband? Where are your sons? Where is your son-in-law?" All of them have been martyred in the Battle of Siffin. He knows it. His army has killed him. Ali didn't do justice to you. How do you feel about Ali? How do you feel about Ali? And this is the strength of Iman. The woman, though old she is, but the nerves are nerves of steel. And the voice as a roaring lioness. You ask me, how do I feel about Ali ibn Abi Talib and his loss? Oh, Amir, think about a woman who was widowed and who had only one son, who was butchered on her legs. That's how I feel about the loss of Ali ibn Abi Talib. I don't feel the loss of my sons. I feel the loss of Ali ibn Abi Talib. Another companion, Hatim, Adi bin Hatim. Adi bin Hatim's sons also were killed in the Battle of Siffin by Syrian army. Again, the lines cross. Ali didn't do justice to you. His sons survived, Hassan and Hussein, and your sons were killed. You see how poisonous, how venomous is the taunt? Adi says, no, it is the other way around. I didn't do justice to Ali. Ali has been martyred and I am alive. I wish I was killed too in his place. These are the men who are nourished and nurtured by taqwa. The Prophet's whole mission was creating a society where taqwa would be the core of its existence, and where munafiq would not have any way in it. And this would not be possible unless and until there was a link to the Prophet, unless and until there was a connection to the Prophet, unless and until there was a sort of understanding that makes you realize that no action of yours is approved without falling on the sunnah of the Prophet. Imam Ali said, as-sunnatu sunnatan. Sunnah too. One sunnah isn't faraid. Anything that you do, that's an obligation, must also be in accordance with the sunnah of the Prophet. The way he has said, the way he has done, the way he has acted. Not that only, recommended are the sunnah. No. In obligation too, you have to follow exactly what the Prophet said. But then people were trying to change the word sunnah itself to give it a different meaning. There was an attempt. The attempt was to make sunnah not the sunnah of the Prophet only. A sunnah by consensus, for example. You won't believe it. The oldest book of tradition that we have, Muwatta of Imam Malik, has mentioned many types of sunnah. Only at 3 places he mentions the sunnah of the Prophet. And otherwise, as-sunnatu indana. That's what he says. Sunnah with us. It came to our later Imams to crush this ideology. Otherwise, the tradition of the masses would have become sunnah. The tradition of rulers would have become sunnah. Our every Imam fought a battle. The venue was different. The time was different. It started with Ali ibn Abi Talib. When in the company of 6, he was asked, would you follow the book of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala? He said yes. Would you follow the sunnah of the Prophet? He said yes. How about the seerah of Shaykhain? And he said no. Machiavelli would have advised him, just say yes and do whatever you feel like. Now, to get votes, to get power, the political reality is that you can say whatever your constituents want to hear and get elected. Then do whatever you feel like. But then, this was not an ordinary man. This was Ali ibn Abi Talib. He said no. He wanted to restrict only 2 sources of law, the Quran and the Sunnah. And you may not have thought about it, but today in the whole Muslim world, wherever there is demand for Islamic system of government, the cry is for book of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and the Sunnah of the Prophet. No one talks about seerah of anyone else. Had Ali accepted that notion, then things would have been different. So the Prophet created a society based on taqwa. Imam Hussein's struggle was to preserve that taqwa, number 1, to undo harm that was done by Umayyads, and number 3, make people realize that in essence, the leadership must be in the hands of pious people. So now, his aim, his objective is, in his own words, what did he say? I have stood up. For what? To re-establish the sunnah of my grandfather. Repeatedly he has said this in different words, but the key is this: I have stood up to re-establish the sunnah of my grandfather. He says that. In one place he says, don't you see that they have thrown the book of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala on their back? And they have trampled on the sunnah of my grandfather? I have stood up to re-establish the sunnah of my grandfather, the tradition of my grandfather. Another place he says, my stand is for Amr bil Ma'ruf wa Nahy anil Munkar. He wrote in a letter to Kufans, after he received a letter from them, that those who don't rule by book of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and the sunnah of my grandfather don't have the right to rule Muslims. That is as clear today as it was then. Muslims must be ruled by the book of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and the sunnah of the Prophet. There is no acceptance for any other kind of rule. No Western oriented, guided, planned, or structured democracy, so as to say. In the democracy, the ultimate power is in the hands of people. In the case of Islam, the only power is in the hands of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. It's a big difference. Majority can make changes wherever they want to and however they want to. In the case of an Islamic government, even if it's elected by people, there are checks and balances. No law can be implemented that is against the dictates of Quran and Sunnah. It's big. So the stand then, Imam Hussein's stand was the re-establishment of what his grandfather had projected. And hence, my telling you that his struggle was not just a reaction to the demand of Bai'ah. As a matter of fact, there are many scholars who believe, and we have ample proof for it, that even if Bai'ah would not have been demanded, the struggle of Hussein would still be there. This is something that may seem strange to you. I have said earlier that the actions of Masoom are not reactionary in nature. They are the ones who chart the course. They are the ones who make the way. They are the ones who make a decision. And that decision is under divine guidance. When he was leaving Medina, he went to the grave of the Prophet, prayed to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Allahumma hadha qabru nabi. Oh Allah, this is the grave of your Prophet. Wa ana ibn bint nabi. And I am the son of your Prophet's daughter. Please, make for me a way that will make him and you happy. Rada. A mu'min, a believer, is not looking for worldly gains. He is looking for Rada of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. To him, acceptance by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is everything. And in reality, brothers and sisters, if you have everything under the sun and you are rejected by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, there is nothing that you have. And if you don't possess anything and Allah accepts you, you have everything. बस अज़ीज़ों मैंने ख़त्म किया, तवालत काफ़ी हो गई है, सिर्फ चंद लम्हे और। इमाम चले और पहली मंजिल इमाम की मक्का थी। मक्के में यजीद के गवर्नर ने इमाम का इस्तकबाल किया है। शायद आप लोगों को इल्म न हो इसका। यब्न रसूलुल्लाह, यब्न रसूलुल्लाह, यब्न रसूलुल्लाह। मक्के के बाद जाहिर है इमाम ने कूफे की राह ली और फिर रास्ता बदलना पड़ा, यहां तक कि करबला में आए। और करबला में एक से सब कुछ लूट गया। सुबह से लेकर शाम तक कुछ भी नहीं, ना अब्बास थे, ना अली अकबर, ना ओनो मोहम्मद, ना कासिम, और कोई ऐसा भी ना था जो उन सैदानियों के लिए पर्दे का इंतजाम करता। नबीजादियां हिजाब के बगैर, पर्दे के बगैर ऊंटों पे सवार की जा रही, और जब ऊंटों पे सवार की जा रही होंगी तो अजब नहीं कि ज़ैनब ने फुरात की तरफ देखकर अब्बास को पुकारा हो, भैया अब्बास, जब मदीने से चले थे तो आपने सवार किया था, भैया आप कहाँ हैं, आइए सवार कीजिए। सवारियां चले यहां तक के कूफे में पहुंचे। जब कूफे में पहुंचे तो बाजार की अजब कैफियत थी। कुछ लोग रो रहे थे और कुछ लोग हंस रहे थे। और बच्चों ने इन 3 दिनों में पानी नहीं पिया था। ये रिवायत जो आप सुनते हैं कि हुर की ज़ौजा पानी लेके आई थी, ये हमीद इब्न मुस्लिम की रिवायत है और उसकी कोई तारीखी हकीकत नहीं। अव्वल यही कि हुर की ज़ौजा करबला में थी या नहीं थी, यही एक मशकूक है, शायद थी ही नहीं। और ये कि इब्न ज़ियाद की फौज इतनी रहमदिल हो गई थी कि पानी भिजवाया उसने, ये बई दस कयास है नहीं। وہ تو وہ تھے کہ پانی بچوں کو دکھا دکھا کے پھینکتے تھے. بچوں نے پانی نہیں پیا تھا اور التش التش بار بار بچے اپنی زبان سے کہہ رہے تھے. ایک راستے سے گزری, وہاں ایک عورت اوپر کھڑی ہوئی یہ منظر دیکھ رہی تھی. اسے پتا نہیں کہ یہ کون ہے. جب بچیوں کی حالت ایسی دیکھی تو ایک کوزہ آب لے کے نیچے آئی کہ یہ پانی ہے, لیکن میں نے سنا ہے کہ جو لوگ مصیبت زدہ ہوتے ہیں اگر وہ کسی کے لیے دعا کریں تو ان کی دعا قبول ہوتی ہے. میں چاہتی ہوں کہ آپ میرے لیے دعا کیجیے. سکینہ کا بڑا ہوا ہاتھ رک گیا. کیا بتا تیری دعا کیا ہے, تیری حاجت کیا ہے؟ کہا میری پہلی حاجت یہ ہے کہ میرے بچے یتیم نہ ہو. مجھے پتا نہیں کہ سکینہ نے کس طرح دعا کی ہو, کس طرح آمین کہی ہو. دوسری حاجت میری یہ ہے کہ میرا شوہر باہر گیا ہو, وہ صحیح سلام گھر واپس آ جا. سکینہ کو بھی منظر یاد آیا ہوگا جب باپ رخصت لے کے گیا تھا اور پھر واپس نہ آیا. اور میری تیسری حاجت یہ ہے کہ میں مدینہ جاؤں اور مدینے کی زیارت سے مشرف ہوں. پوچھا مدینہ جا کے کیا کرے گی؟ کہا مدینے میں میری شہزادی ہے. کہا تیری شہزادی کون ہے؟ کہا میری شہزادی زینب ہے, رسول کی بیٹی. اتنا سننا تھا کہ ثانی زہرا نے اپنے منہ سے بالوں کو ہٹایا. کہا ام حبیبہ تو نے کہاں پہچانا؟ میں زینب ہوں اور یہ نوک نیزہ پر سر حسین. لعنة الله على القوم الظالمين فسيعلم الذين ظلموا أي منقلب ينقلبون ربنا تقبل منا إنك أنت السميع. ربنا لا تزغ قلوبنا بعد إذ هديتنا وهب لنا من لدنك رحمة إنك أنت الوهاب. ربنا ظلمنا أنفسنا وإن لم تغفر لنا وترحمنا لنكونن من الخاسرين. إن الله وملائكته يصلون على النبي يا أيها الذين آمنوا صلوا عليه وسلموا تسليما.